Well, look, I think this has been a very important summit, geopolitically, geoeconomically, in terms of being quite transformative for those outside the West. So it's the global South plus plus, except, of course, the Western countries were missing. This is a forum specifically started by the emerging economies. So it was transformatory because number one, while it began around 2009 and then 2014, they set up the new development bank. The primary international discourse is very dominated by the Western institutions, or even if they are international institutions, let's say like the United Nations or the World Bank, IMF, they're dominated and they were created by the West after the Second World War at a time when the West had emerged kind of bruised but victorious. The US had emerged as a major superpower. There was a bipolar system, and the global South, in a sense, were the colonized, and they were struggling for independence, finding their roots. So now is a time when, so many years after that phase, that countries of the global South have actually emerged and they want their voices heard. And countries who are joining them, who felt excluded by the West, form the BRICS, and now the BRICS Plus and BRICS Plus partners. So a lot of new interesting geopolitical formations have developed. I call it transformatory because the world as we understood it, the post-Westphalian world, the post-World War II world as it was structured, mind you, it hasn't really ended, but it's being questioned, and the power balance, the power which was concentrated in the West, and it was gradually this power from the West has become concentrated in the United States as the strongest unipolar primary power. Now that power has been challenged to some extent, I won't say fully, but to some extent, where you're seeing a diffusion of power. And this challenge is not coming from any one source. There's a mistake to think that the US is being, kind of replaced. It is not. The power which is diffused is coming from multiple sources and multiple nodes. That is why those in the BRICS and outside the West are calling for multipolarity to challenge a kind of a unipolar system which existed. So this challenge is coming, let's say, from China economically, from Russia militarily. They've been able to hold their own. I'm not saying who's good or bad in this, but I'm just saying that this is the balance of forces has changed. The power structure has changed. India, Brazil, South Africa can all exercise economic leverage. They can hold their own and talk about, being partners in international affairs. So that is what I mean by, and what the BRICS mean by multipolarity and a diffusion of power, which came out very strongly in this BRICS summit in Kazan. This summit actually plans a fairly different financial architecture globally. This is not something new that they are doing. This came earlier also. After all, BRICS came at a time of global financial crisis and managed it quite well. That was a time when G20 also developed, where countries, from G7, it expanded to include Russia, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, and some others. In the meantime, the BRICS countries were always asking that they should have a say in the global financial decision making. Because as you can see, the US has veto powers in the IMF and World Bank because of the number of votes they hold, a percentage. It's by percentage, and they manage to have a veto power. So India, China, Brazil, South Africa, and several others were saying we need a reform in the World Bank and IMF, in the global financial structures, which determine everything a lot outside that geopolitics of security. But they didn't release control. And it became very evident during the COVID crisis, and when in the WTO, India and one or two other countries said that, we're facing this huge pandemic. So the patents which are held by the big pharmaceutical companies, for a short while, they should be temporarily released. So we can make the COVID vaccine, because millions in our country are suffering the pandemic. But they didn't say yes. And we had to either develop our own vaccines, and many countries in Africa and Latin America were left without vaccine, except for those which, after the West was vaccinated, they could vaccinate their populations. So all these inequalities led to the belief by BRICS that they can make their own financial systems. And they began with the New Development Bank, the NDB, and the CRA, that is a contingent reserve arrangement. Now, the BRICS countries, they oppose unilateral sanctions. They oppose unilateral economic pressure on countries, which has left hundreds of thousands in the global south ill or injured because of the sanctions that the West has placed on hundreds of these countries. So that's a major BRICS agenda. And to counter that, and especially with the recent experience where the global south has seen how a major economy or a very big economy like Russia could be sanctioned, which impacts the rest of the world, and you have this crisis. So they made their own development bank, and people were skeptical about it because, after all, you have the World Bank and IMF. And this bank is very different than the IMF and World Bank because it doesn't lay conditionalities. 30% of it is in local currencies. And of course, it's just a sliver of the World Bank and IMF, but it has worked all these years. And now in this BRICS meeting, many new financial arrangements have been proposed. Kind of a financial messaging system between these countries has proposed. They're trying to develop one within BRICS, because BRICS countries in the last few years, they have had another important economic success, and that is trading in their national currencies. So it's not just India and Russia ruble, it's China and Russia with yuan and ruble. It's India with many countries in Southeast Asia, because this saves them paying that excess of converting first to dollar, then to their own currency. This saves them money, it strengthens their currency, it gives them economic agency. So they have been successfully doing that. And the BRICS this time encourage this. They also encourage the fact that these countries should have more financial arrangements. So a new financial architecture, it's a process. It can take time. Some things may work, something may not, but it is definitely developing. And I wouldn't say it's replacing the IMF and World Bank or the Western institutions, not at all. They repeatedly said, we are complementing and supplementing these. The fact is that if you saw the photographs and the videos from the BRICS, you would notice one thing, that all the leaders there were mostly men. There was a synergy between those men. It was a big power block, and no one is denying them that. But the fact is, women were missing. And that is not because of BRICS. It's because in international relations and in organizations like BRICS, it's a head of head of states or their foreign minister representatives who appear, and all these places have men as their head of state. No, none of the countries except earlier Bangladesh, which again is shifted now, had women as heads of state. And because politics and security is a hardcore male dominated profession, and it also reflects the internal domestic issues. So the thing I'm saying is that the BRICS are saying that we want our voice to be included in international decision making, and we want an inclusive one, because so far these institutions have been so dominated by the West that the South was excluded. So what we as BRICS Feminist Watch and others are saying is that domestically, let this appeal of inclusion be included domestically, where women are also included. It should not just be that men in the South have been excluded from international decision making, so the South should be included. Of course, they should. But in the domestic structures and in foreign policy and in security, women should also be included. Of course, women have debates on that, who are the women who should be included? Should they be included in war making? Those are long debates which one can go into, but the fact is that that absence of women must be bridged. You see, it is a declaration, so it does have gender included. And what is important is that in the BRICS Development Bank, which generally has no conditionalities, unlike the World Bank, which says you have to have structural adjustment, you have to have austerity. If you go for a loan in the New Development Bank, it has no conditionalities, but it does say your policies should be gender and socially inclusive. So gender is at the back of the mind. And there are many, for example, if it says that, BRICS should have trade in national currency. Now, you can't say, you can't really say women should be part of it, but it includes everyone. I think trade in national currencies helps all genders and the system itself. There's no de-dollarization, but it's helpful. But in social and cultural issues, I think their gender and women have been given some place, but it could have been a bit more. So it's not that gender is completely absent. There's a lot of things which are for the common good of the global South, after all, and it talks a lot about diversity and pluralism, which has been absent from the international discourse. And its method itself is a peaceful method. It's not saying, we want regime change, and they're specifically talking about disarmament and the UN and strengthening institutions, which are all positive things for states and for people. But I think maybe they should have had a para or two specifically dedicated to women and work and women and inclusion in national cultures. But the BRICS position is that we don't intervene in each other's domestic affairs. That's the glue which keeps them together. We don't intervene in each other's sovereignty. You have the rights to behave domestically. We will not say anything. So that's perhaps one reason where they're not talking about it, but in general terms, they can, and in some places they have. I think there are certain myths. One is that there's de-dollarization, which is not. The trade in local currency, whatever BRICS is proposing, is completely, trade in local currencies, multiple currencies. They're not, nowhere have they said de-dollarization. So I don't know why there is this fear of de-dollarization. 80% of the trade is still carried out in dollars. And there are other things besides trade, investments and treasury bonds and all kinds of things. So there'll be a coexistence in everything. So the message is coexistence. And then this whole thing that this BRICS is anti-West, it's not. They've never said it. Multipolarity means what? That the West and the US is part of multipolarity, and there's just a coexistence. So at least accept that. And the geopolitics of it was interesting. There is this strength, and I hope BRICS continues. I also felt that these three countries, Russia, India, and China, are the force behind BRICS right now, especially Russia and China, but also India. And Brazil is taking a bit of a backseat, maybe because they had G20 coming in. They're the hosts for G20 after 2 months. And the next BRICS meeting is in July instead of November. So in 9 months. So I don't know whether how much time they'll have to have that kind of momentum, which earlier India did and then Russia did, and which China is likely to do. So let's hope this momentum and the push which was given in this BRICS continues. I think that's important for the international system as we know it.